thankful to the Chamber of Tax Consultants for giving me one more opportunity to speak on the Consumer Protection Act 2019. Of course, earlier I always spoke on the Consumer Protection Act 1986, but this time we have a new law, and therefore perhaps the Chamber thought it appropriate that let's have a quick review of this new law. And I'm especially thankful to Mr. Kaushik Jhaveri, who has been instrumental in introducing me to the Chamber and involving me in its activities. Normal disclaimer, the presentation is more in the nature of a speaker's note. Now we come to the Consumer Protection Act 2019. The new act has been passed with a lot of debates and deliberations and discussions. And now it consists of 8 chapters with 107 sections. A quick review to the chapter, and again I would like to compare the new provisions with the old law, because that gives us a better picture. The chapter 1 is preliminary. It was there earlier too. Chapter 2 is on Consumer Protection Councils. Again, it was there in the earlier law. Chapter 3, a landmark introduction, the Central Consumer Protection Authority, CCPA as it is known as, is a new chapter altogether. And this chapter seeks to establish a regulatory authority under the Consumer Protection Act 2019. We have been talking about creation of such an authority for over 3 decades, but finally it has been established through the new law. Consumer Dispute Redressal Commissions, they were there earlier also, of course with a little different name, and they are there in the new law. Of course, Chapter 4 is the backbone of the whole Consumer Protection Act 2019. Without Chapter 4, it can't even exist. Chapter 5 is on mediation. Again, a new chapter. Till now, there was never a introduction or involvement of mediation under the consumer disputes. But now this new chapter provides for mediation. And again, for the professionals, it's a good news. In fact, for the professionals who are associated with the Chamber of Tax Consultants, I mean, I can visualize their profiles. Perhaps this is the most interesting chapter where they can be of great contribution and help in strengthening the enforcement of this new law. Then we have another new chapter, which is on product liability. Again, it has been a need because if you really want to protect the interest of the consumers, then you need to have a special chapter which pins down the liabilities on the producers, the traders, the service providers who have been guilty of causing immense injury to the consumers. Chapter 7, offenses and penalties as in any other law. And Chapter 8 talks of miscellaneous provisions like compounding of the offenses, like introduction or existence of this act in addition to the other laws and not in derogation to any other law. Those kind of provisions are incorporated in this. Frankly, you can have 8 full-day sessions on every chapter. Preliminary, well, you have 47 definitions, and to talk of each and every definition, again, you need a full day. Same is the case with other chapters as well. But then idea is to have a quick look at the new law, and therefore I would be going in a fast speed to give an overview of various chapters. As I said earlier, there are 107 sections in the new law. But like any other law of the recent era, the new act also talks about a mechanism whereby the enforcement can happen through the bureaucratic process and not the legislative process, if we may say so. In the sense that if you want to make certain changes in the law, you don't have to go to the parliament, but you can do it through rule enforcement mechanism. We have seen it happening in a big way in one of the largest law in the country, which again, I'm sure practically all members of the chamber are associated with. That's the Companies Act 2000, the Companies Act 2013. The Companies Act 2013 carries a magical phrase, as may be prescribed. And wherever the provisions talk of as may be prescribed, we need to refer to the relevant rules. Now, under the Companies Act 2013, to ensure that these as may be prescribed provisions are prescribed through the rulemaking mechanism, I just took a count this afternoon. We have 47 different sets of rules. And a favorite rule which is applicable practically or which is practiced by practically every member of the chamber is the CARO, Companies Audit Report Order 2020. Now, if you see under the Consumer Protection Act, the rules regime is huge, much larger than the Companies Act 2013 even. Under Companies Act 2013, we have about 470 sections. In this act, we have 107 sections, but if you see the number of rules which may be or which are to be passed by the central government are 36. The rules which are to be passed by the state governments are 17. And then we have regulation mechanism. National Commission for Dispute Redressal is authorized to pass regulations in 9 cases, and the Central Consumer Protection Authority is authorized to come out with different regulations which can number to 4. So in a way, it's going to be a complex regime. The Consumer Protection Act 1986, when it was enacted in December 1986, it was termed as one of the simplest law anywhere in the world, because provisions were very simple. We didn't have so many rules. But now if you see the number of rules which are to be notified by the central government, the state government, the regulations to be notified by the National Commission, by the CCPA, is going to be a complex world. So the simplicity part of the Consumer Protection Act 1986 would certainly be missing, which is not a very welcome sign, because the act is for the protection of the consumers who are in a large number of cases vulnerable, who cannot afford to be guided by the expensive lawyers. I'm sorry to say so. They are supposed to be given a statute which is simple, easy to read and understand. But maybe because of the fact that this law talks of various other issues, you might feel that you need to have enough number of rules to ensure the proper enforcement. To give you a quick look, Section 101 talks of delegation of rule-making power to the central government, and there are 36 clauses. Section 101 bracket 2, bracket A, B, C, D, E, it goes to A to Z, and then Z, A to ZG. There are 36 instances where central government is allowed to come out with different set of rules to enforce those provisions. State governments, now that is another speciality of the Consumer Protection Act. Unlike the Income Tax Act or the Competition Act or the Companies Act, Consumer Protection Act is to be enforced through state governments at state level. And therefore, the state governments also are allowed to come out with set of rules which are to be made applicable for the consumer disputes happening in that particular state. Again, to ensure that there is a uniformity, Section 102 bracket 1 says that the central government is to come out with the model rules. And those model rules are to be modified based on the local requirements by separate state governments. So like Maharashtra will have Maharashtra state consumer protection rules. Gujarat will have Gujarat state consumer protection rules. Practically every state would have. But the good thing is that all those state rules would be in conformity with the model rules which are to be released by the central government. And this rule-making authority, which is delegated to states, is number 217, section 102, bracket 2, bracket A, B, C, D. It goes up to Q. In all those cases, the central government is empowered to frame the rules by issuing appropriate notification. As far as the National Commission is concerned, which is the highest lawmaking authority under the Act, there are 9 instances where the National Commission is entitled to frame the regulations. And the central authority, which is the Central Consumer Protection Authority, a new creation, is allowed to frame rules for enforcing 4 different provisions of the Act. So ultimately, I repeat, it's going to be a complex world, which at times would be very difficult for consumers to understand by a bare reading. Till date, the rules which have been notified, I just thought of giving you a broad overview. The central government has notified the Central Consumer Protection Council rules, then Consumer Protection Consumer Dispute Redressal Commission rules. Of course, the second rule is going to be again the backbone of this law. Then the Consumer Protection Mediation Rules 2020, which would be liked by all the professionals, and the Consumer Protection E-commerce rules, which is going to address not only consumer law related problem, but various other problems which are arising out of the e-commerce activities and which are being faced by practically every consumer day in and day out. As far as the regulations are concerned, the National Commission has come out with the 3 sets of rules. They have already been notified. One is about the procedures related rules. One is about the administrative control, because National Commission is supposed to be the highest authority as far as the judicial tasks are concerned, and therefore National Commission has to administer and also have a control over the activities being performed by the State Commission and District Commission. So to regulate those activities, they have come out with a regulation, and the Consumer Protection Mediation regulations also have been notified by the National Commission, which talks about the process to be followed with reference to the mediation activities. The Central Consumer Protection Authority has till now released only one set of regulations, and that is allocation and transaction of business. But as I said, CCPA is a new authority just created. We may have to wait for another 6 months to see this particular authority operating in a full-fledged manner. However, the fact is that in last 1 month or so, we have witnessed a number of activities happening in the business world where we felt that the CCPA should start operating as fast as possible. Coming to chapter 1, preliminary, it talks of the application first. As far as the applicability is concerned, the very first clause, first section says the Act extends to the whole of India except the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, if you compare the same section with the previous law, under the Consumer Protection Act 1986, the clause read as under as can be seen on the screen, it extends to the whole of India except the state of Jammu and Kashmir. That was the provision from December 1986 till 31st October 2019. But with abolition of certain provisions under the Constitution and giving full autonomy to the Jammu and Kashmir, those particular words were deleted, and therefore Consumer Protection Act 1986, with effect from 31st October 2019, was applicable to the whole country. But this privilege now is withdrawn for the time being, maybe till the other constitutional issues are resolved. The Act would not be applicable to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. There are 47 terms which have been defined under the Consumer Protection Act 2019. Old definitions have been continued in a number of cases. Few new definitions also have been introduced, like the advertisement. The term advertisement has been defined, which includes practically all forms of advertising or marketing tools, online, electronic, every possible format one can think of is included in advertisement. The Act also talks about misleading advertisement, and the term misleading advertisement also has been defined to ensure that there is no gap or loophole left when the matter of interpretation comes. The consumer rights for the first time have been defined under the Consumer Protection Act 2019. Of course, the basic object, which is why we have the Consumer Protection Act, is to ensure the protection of consumer rights of all the consumers. But unfortunately, 1986 did not cover the definition of consumer rights. There was a reference with reference to the Central Consumer Protection Council, that the Central Consumer Protection Council set up under the Consumer Protection Act 1986 would ensure that the rights of the consumers listed as follows are adequately protected and guarded. But now we have a very clear definition of consumer rights in the definition clause, that is section 2 itself. The word design, the word direct selling, which is happening now left, right, center, e-commerce, another great development which has happened especially in the last few years. The injury, the mediation, the product, unfair contract, all these terms have been defined in a very elaborate manner. I repeat, if you want to have a session on definitions, we need one full day to examine all these definitions in detail. And to give you a flavor, there's a term called unfair trade practices. I just took a count, word count. The definition of unfair trade practices consists of 771 words. I'm sure this perhaps must be the longest definition given in any law anywhere in India. 771 words. And larger the definition, more are the possibilities of conflicts. Little more about this particular definition a little later. But before that, I'll just take 3 definitions in a very quick manner because you need to know when we talk of the Consumer Protection Act. First is the term complainant, as to who is eligible to approach the judicial authorities under the Consumer Protection Act. And it says a consumer, a registered consumer association is not a consumer association. It needs to be registered consumer association. No, registration can happen anywhere in any form. It can be a trust, it can be a society, it can be a Section 8 company. Any registered association is eligible to approach the judicial authorities under the Consumer Protection Act 2019. The central government can move the consumer authorities. The state government can activate. The central authority, which is the creation of the Consumer Protection Act 2019, is also vested with this power to file complaints on behalf of the consumers. And that's going to be a major development in times to come, because at times we feel that the individual consumer is not capable of taking up the matter with the authorities because of the high stakes involved or because of the complexities. In such cases, perhaps the central authority will come to the rescue of the consumers. One or more consumers, where the numerous consumers have the same interest, that's known as class action. Of course, this is something which would happen through the central authority also. But like if in a building there are 45 flat buyers and they all suffer because of the deficiency in services being rendered by the builder, then they can file a single complaint. That was allowed in the earlier law also, and that's continued. But this is consumer, because there's a possibility that the consumer, after consuming the goods or services, is expired. In that case, his legal heir is eligible to take up the matter with the authorities, and the minor can also file a complaint through the parent or the legal guardian. These provisions were there earlier also, and they are there now also. And what kind of complaint would be entertained by these judicial forums, namely the district commission, the state commission, or the national commission? All unfair contract, unfair trade practices, restrictive trade practices adopted by a trade or a service provider. Now, unfair contract, you can have a half-day seminar. Unfair trade practices, practically you can have a half-day seminar. Restrictive trade practices, you can have a half-day seminar. They are so exhaustive terms, and they were there in the earlier MRTP Act. Those who are aware, we used to have a very strong law the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act 1969. Originally, this law was the competition law of the country. From 69 till 2009, this act was being used to address the anti-competitive practices related issues. And in the year 1984, there was a global need to amend the local laws by every country, because we got an international document called UN Guidelines on Consumer Protection. And one mandate of the UN Guideline on Consumer Protection was that all signatory countries would have a special law to protect the interest of the consumers. We didn't have too much time to come out to draft a new law and come out with a new law, and therefore in the year 1984, the MRTP Act itself was amended, and they introduced the provisions relating to unfair trade practices in MRTP Act. So originally the act which was enforced to address the monopolistic trade practices and the restrictive trade practices, from 84 also it started to address the unfair trade practices. And then in the year 1986, we got a new robust law in the form of Consumer Protection Act 1986. The Consumer Protection Act 1986 also addressed the unfair trade practices and restrictive trade practices. And to a great extent, therefore, there was an overlap. A consumer had a right to go to the MRTP Commission under MRTP Act 1969, or to go to the authorities under the Consumer Protection Act 1986. Of course, the term RTP under MRTP Act was very widely defined, whereas in case of Consumer Protection Act, RTP meant only practices relating to tie-up sales, that too at a consumer level. However, we did have a dual remedy available to the consumer, but there was a difference. In case of MRTP Act, a consumer was not eligible to claim any kind of compensation. MRTP Commission had only one power, and that was cease and desist order. Whereas in case of Consumer Protection Act, the consumer could also claim for compensation for the injuries suffered and the losses suffered. So consumers started to approach the forums created under the Consumer Protection Act 1986. Yet we have seen this dual regime till 30th September 2009, when the MRTP Act was repealed and the new act, namely the Competition Act 2002, was brought onto the statute. And thereafter, again, there was a problem where to transfer all pending cases relating to unfair trade practices. There was a separate mechanism provided under the Competition Act 2002 itself, and they were dealt by the Competition Act 2002. Well, here coming back to the grudges which a consumer at an individual or as a group level has about the defective goods, something which happens. In fact, if you notice the life of a lay consumer anywhere in the world, a consumer would get up, would like to have a cup of bad tea. There's every possibility that the milk which is being used to prepare the bad tea is adulterated. There's every possibility that the tea leaf which is used to prepare the tea is adulterated or colored. Because if you go to rural India, the used tea leaves are colored and then used recycled. You want to have a breakfast, you prepare upma, there is every possibility there would be iron flings adulterated in the upma. There are various kitchen masalas which are adulterated. They use papaya dry seeds to adulterate the black pepper. They use color to adulterate haldi. They use brick powder, which is deadly dangerous to a consumer's health, is used to adulterate red chili. You name it and you have it. So the breakfast which you are having again is defective. You take a bath, you use a bathing soap that also may be adulterated, or that may not give you the desired information which are required to be given to you. You come out of your house, you want to go to a bank, you need to take a bus. deficient services. The bus is empty, but the bus driver doesn't halt it. You want to take a rickshaw, the fellow would not be willing to take you to your destination. If at all he is willing to take, he may overcharge you. You go to the bank, the kind of services which are to be rendered by the bank to you may not be of the desired standards. You want to withdraw cash according to the banking charter, you need to be given the cash within 5 minutes, but you may have to wait for 50 minutes. You name it and you have it throughout the day. You come across n number of cases where you are either getting defective goods or you are getting deficient service. This is about the lay consumer. And then you go to a higher pedestal. The prices which are being charged are higher, fixed by or under any law, displayed on the goods or any package, displayed on the price list, exhibited, agreed between the parties. Those kind of examples are very normal. Or the goods which are being used are hazardous to life. Well, this year we won't have Diwali, but otherwise, if you notice the crackers being sold, a classic example which falls into this category of the goods hazardous to life and safety, they are pegged in contravention to the safety standards set up by the government, or the seller, the trader would never give you information about the defects which are there, which makes the goods unsafe. So, or the last clause, a claim for product liability action, we have a separate section for that. If time permits, we would go through that. So this is a list of grudges which a consumer can have and for which he can approach the consumer dispute redressal commission and get his complaint redressed. Who is a consumer? Anyone who buys goods or hires services for a consideration. So anything which is offered free cannot be complained about. Only if the price has been paid. And again, not that full price has to be paid. It can be paid, it can be payable in installment, it can be on hire purchase, doesn't matter. So free goods and free services are not included in the domain of the Consumer Protection Act 2019. And it does not include the case where goods turned out to be defective or services turned out to be defective if they were used for commercial purposes. So if I purchase goods for resale and those goods turn out to be defective, I'm not a consumer because I'm using those goods or services for commercial purposes. And an explanation also, it was there in the earlier act, it's there now also. Commercial purpose means anything which is used for commercial purpose. But at the same time, we had a landmark judgment from the Supreme Court in Lakshmi Engineering Works, where the Supreme Court said that if goods are being used to run the livelihood, in that case, the use of the goods cannot be termed as commercial purposes. So if a person was buying a single rickshaw and using it to earn his livelihood, or if a person was buying a Xerox machine and opening a small shop to give Xerox to the people and use it as a means of livelihood, in that case, if the Xerox machine turned out to be defective, he could claim damages under the Consumer Protection Act because the machine was used not for commercial, but for the livelihood. And another interesting addition in the explanation is that buy any goods or services offline or online. This online transaction was a major problem through electronic means or by tele-shopping or multi-level marketing, direct selling. We didn't have very clear provisions under the Consumer Protection Act 1986, and there's a big gap which has been now plugged through addition of this explanation, and therefore all online offline transactions are covered by the provisions under the Consumer Protection Act 2019. Just to give you an idea, as I said earlier, unfair trade practices, 447 words are included in this particular definition. If you see the mechanism, you have 2 bracket 47 bracket 1, again subdivided into A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, H again subdivided in A and B, I, J subdivided in explanation A, B, C. Then you have two explanations. We have 3, A, B, C, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I have never come across Rather, I would put it in a different. I've come across only one definition which is more complicated than this definition. And that definition is under the Companies Act 2013. If you happen to see the beneficial owners rule, there is an explanation to Rule 2(h). These rules were drafted and are in force under Section 90 of the Companies Act 2013. That's perhaps the most complicated explanation that is not even a definition. When it comes to definition, so with such a large definition, yes, we will have a lot of litigation, legal challenges, interpretational issues, but there are positive sides. I have no time to go through all these clauses A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, nothing. But only last two clauses I would like to just quickly read. Unfair trade practices. Not issuing bill or cash memo or receipt for the goods sold or services would be termed as an unfair trade practice. It's a very welcome inclusion. And another inclusion is, which affects us all. I'm highlighting the word us, we all professionals, qualified, learned people. Disclosing to other person any personal information given in confidence by the consumer, unless such disclosure is made in accordance with the provisions of any law for the time being in force. Now, this last clause, clause 9, we have been facing major problems. There is no clear-cut solution to the misuse of consumer information through information technology mechanism. Perhaps this definition would help us in addressing this issue till the time we have another privacy bills and all are enacted under the information technology regime. Coming to Chapter 2, Consumer Protection Council. Let me admit this is my first address on the webinar. I'm seeing notice Kaushik Javeri raised hand. Can anyone guide me as to what do I have to do? It's like, is it a question or?
So we will take the question answers round later on, because is it okay with you?
Yeah, I would rather be comfortable because the presentation is little long and therefore let's rush through.
Okay. So anybody having any question, please post it on your chat box so that later on it can be taken by the speaker.
So we come to Chapter 2, the Central Consumer Protection Council. These councils are mainly for the advocacy, because you need to have a mechanism by which you are supposed to create awareness about the existence of this law. Of course, the law has been in force from 1986 we have. Still, the need is felt, and therefore, Chapter 2 talks about creation of 3 specified councils to render advice on promotion and protection of the consumer rights. These councils are we set up at the national level, at the state level, and the district level. Central Council at the national level would be headed by the minister in charge of the Department of Consumer Affairs. The state council would be headed by the minister in charge of consumer affairs of the particular state, and the district council would be headed by the collector of the district concerned. So practically, you see that we have these bodies at the local levels, at the district level, at the state level, and the national level to promote and protect the interest of the consumers on advocacy basis. Then we come to the major chapter of this law, Central Consumer Protection Authority. We didn't have a regulator under the Consumer Protection Act, and therefore this chapter seeks to establish a specific authority to promote, protect, and enforce the rights of consumers as a class. So Act in general might be dealing with the problems of the consumers at an individual level, but when it comes to the addressing issues at a class level, we have the CCPA. And we as a professional need to know about various dimensions of the CCPA, because the bodies like CCPA would need indulgence of professionals like advocates or chartered accountants or company secretaries. This is an area where bodies like Central Consumer Protection Council, etc., would not be very helpful. The object of the CCPA was given in the statement of object and reasons which was placed in the Parliament, that to initiate class action and to include the enforcement provisions relating to recall, refund, and return of products, something which was not very visible in the old law. So CCPA would address that, and again to fill an institutional void in the regulatory regime. So as I said earlier, there was no regulatory institution under the Consumer Protection Act 1986, which is now sought to be created through CCPA. And by the way, CC has already been established through a notification by the central government with effect from 20th July. CCPA would be headquartered in Delhi, but then they will have a number of commissioners who perhaps would take care of the geographical needs of different parts of the countries. CCPA is empowered to engage the experts and professionals for specific issues. CCPA will have a separate investigation wing, because to exercise powers by the CCPA, it should have sufficient findings, and those findings are to be investigated first by the Director General. So we have a separate body called Director General under CCPA itself. By the way, difference under Competition Act 2002 also we have a Director General, but then the Director General is not a part of the Competition Commission of India. Director General there is a separate body appointed by the central government. Here, investigation wing, that is Director General, is a part of the CCPA itself. And in the beginning especially, the CCPA can request a district collector to conduct certain inquiries, because Director General's appointment and establishment, etc., would take time. So to ensure that the provisions are activated as early as possible, CCPA is empowered to request the district collector concerned to act on behalf of the CCPA. The functions of CCPA includes to file the complaints before the National Commission, the State Commission, the District Commission, recommend adoption of international covenants. As I said earlier, we have a very strong document, UN Guidelines on Consumer Protection, which is followed by practically every member of UN. So 130 plus countries are following that document, wonderful document. So and this document is reviewed after every 2 years. So to recommend adoption, etc., to those kind of documents, to undertake research, to promote awareness, encourage NGOs, etc., etc. These are the functions which are to be performed by the CCPA. Important tool which is given to the CCPA is to pass orders for the recall of the goods. It happens at times. It has happened in last few years in different developed countries. The motor cars were released by the car manufacturing companies with defective products. And when it was discovered that they were hazardous, they were harmful, immediately the orders were passed and all those cars were recalled. We don't have a clear-cut mechanism on this part, and therefore now we have Section 22, which empowers CCPA. If CCPA is being satisfied on the basis of the investigation, in that case they may recall the goods or withdrawal of services which are dangerous, hazardous, or unsafe. And when the product is recalled, the prices of the product should be reimbursed to the consumer concerned, and the parties who were indulging in those manufacturing of those goods or rendering of those services be directed to discontinue such practices. Another important provision which is top of the town, especially from media perspective, is about the endorsements. Day in and day out, all the products in India are endorsed or advertised through using personalities or celebrities. And it's a fact of life. If a soap manufacturing company comes out with an ad saying that the qualities of this particular soap or detergent is vetted by a leading research institution or a large university, nobody would take that endorsement. But if a film star tells you that please use this soap or this detergent powder, you would use it, knowing fully well that this film star himself or herself may not have used the same product. To address those kind of problems, now we have a very strong tools in the hand of CCPA. Section 21 talks of penalties against false or misleading advertisements. penalties not only on the publishers, not only on the manufacturer, but also the person who is endorsing the product. And therefore, due diligence is mandatory for any celebrity who is endorsing a product or any service. Quick look. The CCPA has a power to issue directions to the concerned trader or manufacturer or endorser or advertiser or publisher that you discontinue this advertisement or modify the same. By the way, let's place on record the appreciation for a body which is doing the same task, that is Advertising Standard Council of India, ASCI. They are doing good work to address these issues, but now we have legal remedies because ASCI could not penalize a wrong advertiser or advertising agency. They can always only ask the advertising company or publisher to stop publishing those advertisements. But now here we have the provisions in terms of penalties. So the manufacturer or endorser can be penalized up to 10 lakhs. Subsequent contravention penalty up to 50 lakhs. The CCPA can also pass directive prohibiting the endorser for a period of 1 year that hereinafter for 1 year you will not endorse any product or product relating to a particular branch, depending on the case. That's why, as I said earlier, it's going to be a complicated issue. But yes, if the endorser can prove that he took due care and due diligence was done, in that case, he may escape these penalties. The meaning of advertisement, again, is given in the definition clause. It talks of any kind of message or verbal statement or demonstration or depiction of name or signature or all possible forms of mechanism through which the consumers can be misguided are included in this definition. CCPA also has the power to conduct search and seizure. An order passed by the CCPA can be appealed to the National Commission within 30 days. And any non-compliance of direction of CCPA regarding the product recall or advertisement only relating to section 20 and 21, there is a provision for imposition of fine, imprisonment, or both. And yes, the offenses relating to section 2021 can be compounded also like any other statute. We have another chapter, chapter 4, Consumer Dispute Redressal Commissions. They have been in existence from 1986. They are the backbone of the whole Consumer Protection Act. 80% of the act is enforced through these agencies. At district level, we have the District Consumer Redressal Commission. It's known as District Commission. Earlier, they were known as the District Forum. Now we have District Commission. At state level, we have the State Consumer Dispute Redressal Commission, known as State Commission. So for every state, we have a state commission. For every district, we have a district commission. For large districts like Bombay, we have district commission 1, district commission 2. So there's a possibility if the district is too large, you may have more than one district commission and the national commission at the national level. Whom do we approach? It all depends on the value of the goods or services which are paid by the consumer. If it's up to 20 lakhs, one has to approach the, in the old law, the ceilings thresholds were 20 up to 1 and more than 1. In the new law now, if the value of the goods or services paid are up to 1 crore, in that case, one has to approach the district commission. 1 crore or more, but up to 10 crores, one has to approach the state commission. And above 10 crores, one has to approach the national commission. One beautiful feature of the Consumer Protection Act 1986 was not only that it was simple, it was inexpensive. No filing fee was required to be paid. Even the affidavit was to be given on a plain paper. A postcard could be treated as a complaint. Now, it was seen that these provisions were misused by miscreants, and therefore they have introduced the payment of filing fee, depending on, again, the value. Filing fee is not too high, but yes, some kind of token fees to be charged, depending on the value of the goods or services covered by a particular complaint. In case of district commission, the maximum would be 2,000. In case of state commission, the maximum would be 6,000. And in national commission, the standard 10 crore and above would be the pecuniary limit, and therefore 7,500 fee will have to be paid. Three important features which were not there in the earlier one, but which are there. E-filing now will be permitted with reference to all the three stages: State Commission, District Commission, and the National Commission. Hearing through video conferencing also is provided for in the new Act. And perhaps the most beautiful inclusion in the whole Act is that the complaint can be filed where complainant resides or works. So if I stay in Borivali, I can file a complaint in Bombay District Commission also, even if I purchase the goods from Delhi or from Kanpur or from Ludhiana. Earlier, we had limitations. We could file a complaint where the opposite party was operating from, or opposite party had a branch, or where the cause of action has arisen. All those provisions are continued, but they have added a beautiful provision saying that the complaint can be filed even where the complainant resides. So practically, justice is at the consumer's doorsteps. Coming to mediation, Chapter 5, it talks of alternate dispute resolution mechanism under the Consumer Protection Act 2019. It has been introduced for the first time. There are few provisions relating to this, and fortunately, with reference to mediation, the regulations were to be released by the National Commission, and National Commission has already come out with the regulations. We'll take a quick look of the relevant provisions, and it's mandatory, by the way. Consumer mediation cells shall be attached to every district commission, state commission, and national commission, and they would be established by the government. So it's basically the duty of the government to establish, and they would be reporting to the government. And these mediation cells will send quarterly report to the district commission or state commission or national commission to which these mediation cells are attached with. These mediation cells shall maintain the list of empaneled mediators, the cases handled, record of proceedings. Practically all records would be maintained by the mediation cells, and they will empanel the mediator. The panel of mediators shall be valid for a period of 5 years at a time. So maybe within perhaps 6 months, every district commission, every state commission, and the national commission will have a panel of mediators, and those mediators would be allowed to operate for a period of 5 years from the date of appointment, provided that there are no other professional complications. The manner in which the matter would be addressed or decided by the mediation panel would be, the provision says that if it appears to the commission, I repeat, state commission or district commission or national commission, that there are elements of a settlement which may be acceptable to the parties, in that case, the commission will direct the parties to give in writing their consent to have the dispute settled through mediation. And therefore, resolution through mediation would happen only when both the parties or all the parties have given their consent in writing to the commission concerned. And the mediation shall be held in the consumer mediation cell attached to the concerned commission. So not that you go to the office of the mediator and do the discussion there. The mediator will have to sit in the cell which would be maintained by every commission. Number one. And once the issue is resolved, the mediator will prepare a settlement report and forward the signed report to the commission. If there is no agreement, in that case, the failure report, the mediator would send a report that there has not been an agreement to the consumer dispute concern, and then the matter would be decided by the commission. With that connection, the commission is to pass the order recording the settlement within 7 days from the date of receipt of the report from the mediator. There is a possibility the dispute is settled only in part. In that case, the commission would record the part which has been settled, and the dispute or the part of dispute which has been settled through this mechanism cannot be appealed. The Act is very clear: no appeal shall lie from any order passed by the commission pursuant to a settlement by mediation. And that is the reason, which is why in the very beginning they said only with the consent of all the parties in writing, that yes, we agree this to settlement of this dispute through mediation, and we will not have a right to appeal the final decision. Then we have the rules framed by the central government, and under rules there are certain do's and don'ts. Rather don'ts. It says that certain matters cannot be referred to the mediation. The complex medical negligence matters, or fraud related matters, fabrication of documents, forgery, impersonation, criminal coercion, or matters involving public interest where you need to examine the matter in greater detail. The matters cannot be referred to the mediation. And party shall not initiate a arbitral judicial proceeding in respect of a matter which has been a matter of. It's connected to our principle of res judicata. You cannot do the forum shopping that you go to consumer court also, you go to any other mechanism also. If you decide to be here, then you cannot, for the same dispute, approach any other judicial forum. Regulation talks about the eligibility, and this is something which should be of interest to the members of the Chambers of Tax Consultant. Well, a good news for all the advocates. They are eligible to be appointed as a mediator because of the fact that they are into litigation practice, or people who have been with judiciary at different level like district court, at high courts, Supreme Court, retired judges, they are all eligible, retired district judges, retired session judges. But there is no clear recognition to other professions, namely the chartered accountants, the company secretaries, and the cost accountants, who are reasonably familiar with the mechanism of settling a dispute. And I'm making this statement on the basis of a provision under the Companies Act 2013. Section 442 of Companies Act 2013 permits a chartered accountant or a company secretary or a cost accountant in practice, in addition to the lawyers and the retired judges, etc., to act as mediator, to be enrolled as a member of the mediation and conciliation panel, which is being maintained by every regional director in the country. If the Companies Act, which is more complex, can permit the practicing professionals, namely the chartered accountants, the cost accountants, and the company secretaries, why not the state commission or national commission or district commission should allow them? But yes, we have a category that it says person having experience of at least 5 years mediation or conciliation. Now it's a little vague. What do you mean by 5 years experience? If as a company secretary I have acted as a mediator for 5 years under the Companies Act, will I be eligible to be appointed as a mediator under Consumer Protection Act 2019? It remains to be seen. But yes, they made sure that retired bureaucrats are allowed, and that's why they've included a clause: experts or other professionals with at least 15 years experience, or retired senior bureaucrats or retired executives. So bureaucrats, they have a mechanism to find places in such bodies, and they've done it. The regulations talks about the procedure for empanelment, the fee to be paid to the mediator, the proceedings, the role of mediator, reports, etc., etc. Then there is another interesting thing which I said is not very clearly spelled out in any other act, relates to e-commerce with reference to a lay consumer. And to address these issues, the central government has come out with the Consumer Protection E-commerce Rules 2020. Provisions. The e-commerce has been defined as a means of buying or selling goods, services, including digital products on digital or electronic network. Electronic service provider. Earlier, what was happening was that mediators in e-commerce mechanism were excluded. They were not supposed to be the part of trading activities, but now they have been included. A person who provides technology or processes to enable a product seller engage in advertising, etc., would also be a part of the domain under the Consumer Protection Act 2019. E-commerce entity, a person who owns or operates or manages digital or electronic facility platform for e-commerce, but does not include, there are certain don'ts. Otherwise, all e-commerce entities are included. And something, well, The meaning of grievance with reference to e-commerce is that it includes any complaint to an e-commerce entity regarding violation of the provisions of this act or the rules made thereunder. Inventory e-commerce entity, there is a possibility that an entity might be only acting as an inventory holder. They are also covered by the provisions of this act. They cannot escape the liabilities. I'm sorry, I'm going a little quick because there are many more things. An idea is to give you an overview. Marketplace, again, is defined in the regulations. These terms are not defined in the act, but they are all defined in the regulations, not even in the rules. A platform also is defined. The scope and applicability, it covers everything which happens through electronic platform. All unfair trade practices, all misleading advertisements, all restrictive trade practices which are practiced through electronic platform would be covered by these rules. And this is something which not very clear to me as well, but we can debate. The regulation says that an e-commerce entity shall be a company incorporated under the Companies Act 1956 or Companies Act 2013, or a foreign company covered under Section 2(42) of the Companies Act 2013. Second, an office, branch, or agency outside India owned or controlled by a person resident in India as provided under Section 2(5)(3) of FEMA 1999. Now, if we go by this definition as given under the e-commerce regulations framed by the National Commission, only a company is eligible to act as an e-commerce entity. Now, is that the intention of the lawmakers? I am not too sure, because if we go by this definition, an LLP or a partnership firm or any other body of individuals cannot act as an e-commerce entity, whereas they have a right to carry out business activities in any other manner. And connected to this is that every e-commerce entity shall appoint a nodal person of contract or alternate senior designated functionary who is a resident in India, because there is a possibility that e-commerce entity is located outside India. In that case, they will have to have a local presence to ensure compliance with the provisions of this act or the rules made thereunder. So if, and as we have seen in the previous slide, that it has to be a company. So practically the board of directors will have to pass a resolution appointing somebody as a nodal person who needs to be located in India and who needs to be senior designated functionary. Other thing, the information to be displayed. Every e-commerce entity to provide following information in a clear and accessible manner on its platform. If you visit a number of, I don't want to name them, but if you visit a number of e-portal, you cannot locate their addresses. No email ID is available, only there is a phone number. If you have in fact, the laptop which is being used to make this presentation, I bought the laptop from an e-commerce company. It turned out to be defective. Immediately we wanted to return it. We could not locate the address. As a consumer activist, I tried to do that, but no, only a phone number was available. We were supposed to give a missed call. We gave a missed call. And within few seconds, we got a call back. The call was from some European country. It was definitely through a call center. And they heard our grievance. Laptop was collected back, money was refunded, and then I bought another. Well, as far as the mechanism is concerned, it was fairly good. But the fact that I could not locate the address of the company concerned on the portal was shocking. Now, those kind of issues are addressed here. They have to display the legal name of the e-commerce entity, principal geographic address of the headquarters. And again, because it's to function as a company, we would know the directors' names, their addresses also, and therefore we can hold them personally liable. Name and details of its website, contact details like email address, fax, landline, mobile number of the customer care and the grievance officer. So introduction of compulsory display of this information on the portal is one of the landmark feature of the new law. And every e-commerce company has to have a grievance redressal mechanism. Establish an adequate grievance redressal mechanism having regard to the number of grievances ordinarily received by the entity from India, and against, because they know that these entities are operating at a global level, and therefore this regulation talks of taking care of Indian consumers, and shall appoint a grievance officer for consumer grievances redressal, and shall display the name, contact detail, and designation of the officer on its platform. So you can hold the individual, catch hold of the person and get your grievance redressed if required. And acknowledge the receipt of the consumer complaint within 48 hours. The moment you lodge a complaint within 48 hours, there should be an acknowledgement given to you that yes, your complaint has been received, noted by us, and it has to be redressed within a period of 1 month from the date of receipt of the complaint. So this is what is introduced through the regulations. With reference to imported goods or services for sale, again, the entity has to mention the name and details of the importer from whom it has been purchased, goods, services, etc., etc. So there is a proposal to introduce total transparent mechanism as far as business activities are concerned. Just let me check the time.
Sir, it's 6:08.
Okay. Yeah. Another good news for the consumers, Chapter 6, product liability, but equally bad news for the producers, service providers, sellers, because this chapter is going to create a lot of problems. But well, the provisions are explained in great detail in the law. But because of the high stakes, we will witness large number of litigation as far as this chapter is concerned, Chapter 6, product liability, because the manner in which definition, etc., have been given, you can very easily conclude that there is a large scope for litigation, because practically every term is liable to be twisted depending on the facts of the case. This chapter provides for the claim for compensation under a product liability action for any harm caused by a defective product manufactured by a product manufacturer or service provider or sold by a product seller. So the three sets of intermediaries who are liable for product liability under this chapter: number one, the manufacturer; number two, the service provider relating to a product, maybe in case of automobile, the person who is repairing your vehicle, or the seller of the products. All the three parties are equally responsible to a consumer. The term product, you can see the manner in which these definitions are given. Product is defined under section 2 bracket 33. A very exhaustive definition means any article or goods or substance or material or any extended cycle of such product which may be in gaseous, liquid or solid state, processing intrinsic value. So even if you have experts from chemistry and physics to give different twists to the goods, practically every possible dimension of the goods or product are covered by this definition, but does not include the tissues, blood product and organs. So exclusions are also very clearly given in the definition itself. Product liability, what do you mean by product liability? Again, means the responsibility of, as I said earlier, a product manufacturer or a product seller or a product service provider, because the consumer should have some kind of liberty. He is located in a small village in the country. Now, he cannot at times file a complaint against the manufacturer who is located in a large city. In that case, perhaps he would file a case against the product seller or the service provider at the local level. To compensate for any harm caused to the consumer by such defective product manufactured by the manufacturer or sold by the seller or by deficient services rendered by the product service provider. So all the three intermediaries are adequately covered. What do you mean by product liability action? They have not left any scope for any ambiguity. Every term has been defined. Product liability action, section 235, means a complaint filed by a person before a district commission or a state commission or a national commission for claim for compensation for the harm caused to him. Who is a product manufacturer? All forms of manufacturing facets are covered by this definition. You might be making a product or assembling the parts thereof, puts or causes to be put his own mark on any product, maybe assembling and then putting one's mark, making a product and selling, distributing, leasing, installing, preparing, packaging, labels, labeling, marketing, repairing. Every possible activity connected to manufacturing is included in this definition. Designing, producing, fabricating, constructing, or remanufacturing. Being a product seller of a product is also a manufacturer of such product. Which product seller? Separate definition. A person who in the course of business imports or sales or distributes or leases or installs or prepares or package or label. One cannot escape that, sir, I was only importing, or I was just marketing the product, or I was just maintaining inventory and just passing it out. Everything is included. The moment you do any of these commercial activities, you are a product seller. And includes a manufacturer who is also a product seller, a service provider, but does not include, there are exclusions, a seller of immovable property in certain cases, provider of professional services, again in certain cases, a person who acts only in a financial capacity, or who is not a manufacturer or wholesaler or distributor. So exclusions also have been very clearly defined, but the exact meaning of these terms would be known to us only when we live the law for some time, like provider of a professional services. Like I'm not talking of the product service provider, but in general, a lawyer also has been held accountable for deficient services under Consumer Protection Act. Even a chartered accountant has been held negligent in case of certain tax matters and all, where it was proved to the satisfaction of the commission that there was a negligence on the part of a professional who was rendering services. Here there is a exclusion in certain manners, but then it's connected to professional services rendered with regard to a product which is manufactured. Product service provider means a person who provides any service in respect of such product, namely like the garage owners and all who are servicing the motor cars and all. What is the liability of product manufacturer? Again, given the act itself, you don't have to visit the rules or regulations. All these facts are spelled out in the act itself. Separate liability of product manufacturer, separate liability of product seller, separate liability of product service provider. And this is for the first time we are getting all these things documented in a statutory manner, in such a detailed manner. Manufacturing defect, defect in design, deviation from the manufacturing specifications, does not conform to express warranty. What is express warranty? That also, by the way, has been defined in the definition. What is the meaning of design? Again, that's been defined in the definition. Fails to contain adequate instruction, correct uses to prevent any harm or any warranty regarding improper or incorrect uses. A product manufacturer shall be liable in a product liability action even if he proves that he was not negligent, fraudulent in making or express warranty. So not much scope to escape the liability by the person who has manufactured the product. What is the liability of the product service provider? If the service is faulty or imperfect or deficient or inadequate quality in nature. Very good vocabulary has been used in all these definitions. You need to be a wordsmith to come out with so detailed definitions. In general, we don't come across so well-written definitions. And from that perspective, yes, it's a act in complete respects. Like the act of omission, commission, or negligence, or consequences withholding any information which caused harm, did not issue adequate instruction or warning to prepare for any harm, or did not conform to express warranty or terms or conditions. The product seller who is not a manufacturer is also liable if he is having a control over the designing or testing or manufacturing of the product, etc. So you cannot say that I am just a seller, I'm not a manufacturer, and therefore I should not be held responsible. He is duty bound not to just purchase the goods from the manufacturer and sell it to the consumer. He is also supposed to apply his own mind with reference to the crucial aspects of the product concerned. And again, every case would be differ from product to product. If he is a person who is altering or modifying the product, depending again on the consumer's requirement, in that case, he is responsible. Or express warranty of a product and such product fail to conform to the express warranty. So the term guarantee and warranty, which are otherwise defined under the Contract Act, would have a important role to play here. So in addition to the Contract Act and the Sales of Goods Act, we have Consumer Protection Act 2019 to address the issues relating to the express warranties. Chapter 8 is about the offenses and penalties. The key provisions, it provides for the punishment for manufacturing, for sale or storing, selling or distributing or importing products which are adulterant. So this is something which is in addition to our food adulteration laws. We have those laws in force. Provisions have been incorporated under the Consumer Protection Act also. If a seller is selling adulterated product knowingly or importing spurious goods and all, then he will be eligible for, he is liable to pay the penalties. The authorities also have a power to conduct vexatious search, and it's also provided that if government officer conduct a search with a hidden agenda, with no clear evidences, only with a view to harass a trader or manufacturer, in that case, that official is liable to pay a penalty. So here there is a provision with reference to imposition of penalty on the person who is otherwise supposed to enforce the provisions of the law. There are few important provisions. Central government has been empowered to create awareness about this law. Advocacy mechanism or powers have been conferred upon the central government. They can take all possible measures to prevent unfair trade practices in e-commerce, direct selling, etc. Like in case of Competition Act, we have the competition advocacy provisions, and the Competition Commission of India is mandated to take actions for creating awareness about imposition or creation of a healthy competition culture in the country. The same kind of provisions or authorities have been granted to the central government. There is a provision for compounding of offenses like any other law, and the act is not in derogation of any other law. It's in addition to, and therefore, if there is an overlap, in that case, which law is to prevail is to be seen in harmonious construction of the relevant provision in the other law as well. I think that's all from me. Now we can open for questions or discussion, because it's a new law. I'm also, what I've done is a kind of academic approach, and therefore would be open for suggestion or ideas from the members who on their practical experience can share their experiences.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. It was a very good session. Kaushik sir, do you have any query? You have raised your hand. Can you unmute yourself and raise a query? Kaushik sir, am I audible? Okay. There is a question from Mr. Dubey. It is role of state government in new law in comparison to the previous law.
Mainly, state governments have a role only with reference to the activities of state commission. So nothing special is added here, but The state government is to decide in what all districts you are supposed to, or you should have 2 district commissions, 3 district commissions, and state government will have a role to play with reference to the appointment of members. The major problem which we have been witnessing from 1986 till now is the appointment of president and members to the district commission and the state commission. And this is a job which is to be performed by the state government. You are fully aware that the president of the state commission would be retiring 6 months down the line. Still, you do not make proper attempts. Well, there are reasons which is why all these things happen. But then state government needs to be tough. They should come out with a set of document as to how the appointments are to be made and what mechanism is to be followed. Well, this is just a suggestion, but if the experience is something which we have to go by, then perhaps nothing much is going to happen. We have seen appointments happening on the basis of political connections and all, bureaucratic connections. All these things are being witnessed, but then again, it's not something which is peculiar to Consumer Protection Act 2019. It's there in all laws. So this is where, again, well, if at all state government is proactive, they can do something better.